I believe you are addressing my wife.
The ballroom fell silent the moment Frederick Ashby saw her. She stood beneath the chandeliers in a gown that caught the candlelight with every breath she took. Her chin lifted, her eyes steady on nothing at all. Frederick's glass stopped halfway to his lips. 3 years had not softened her face. If anything, she looked sharper now, colder, like something carved rather than grown. He crossed the floor before he could stop himself. "Beatrice," he said, loud enough for the nearest guests to turn. "I did not expect to find you among such companies. Last I heard, you were scrubbing floors for coins in Leeds." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Beatrice Sherwin did not flinch. "You always did enjoy an audience, Frederick. I simply state what everyone here should know," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping into something meant to wound, "that the woman I once pitted enough to court is now standing in a room she does not belong in." Behind him, the room had gone very still, too still. A tall figure moved through the parting crowd, his coat dark as the shadows he seemed to carry with him, his expression unreadable in the way that made grown men lower their eyes. Frederick felt the air change before he understood why. "Mr. Ashby." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the ballroom like a blade drawn from its sheath. "I believe you are addressing my wife." Frederick turned, and the color left his face entirely, because standing before him was the Duke of Merrowfield, the most feared man in the city, his hand now resting protectively at the small of Beatrice's back as though she were something worth killing for. What happens when Frederick realizes exactly who he has humiliated? Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, like this video, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The music did not resume for a long moment. Frederick stood frozen beneath the chandelier's light, his collar suddenly too tight, his carefully composed evening dissolving into something he could not undo with words. The Duke of Merrowfield had not raised his voice, had not so much as clenched a fist, and yet the entire ballroom understood that a man had just made a fatal error in judgment. "Come, Beatrice," the Duke said quietly, offering his arm. "The night grows tiresome." She took it without a glance back at Frederick, and together they moved toward the far end of the hall, where a cluster of guests parted like water around a ship's bow. Frederick stood alone, aware of every whisper, every fan raised to hide a smile, every gentleman who suddenly found something fascinating in his wine glass rather than meet his eye. It was Lady Caroline Pemberton who finally approached him, her expression somewhere between pity and delight, the particular blend reserved for watching another person's ruin. "You did not know," she said. "It was not a question. How could I have known?" Frederick's voice came out rougher than he intended. 3 years ago she was nothing, a tradesman's daughter with a dowry so small my mother laughed at the mention of it. I left her because there was nothing to stay for. And now she is a duchess. Caroline's fan moved lazily. The city's most feared duchess, married to a man who has ruined 3 lords this year alone for lesser offenses than what you have just done. I do hope you have made your peace with whatever remains of your standing in London. Frederick watched them across the room. The Duke bent his head toward Beatrice, said something too low for anyone else to catch, and for the briefest moment, something shifted in her face. Not softness exactly. Recognition, perhaps. Trust, hard-won and carefully guarded. He had never seen her look at him that way. Not once, in the 2 years they had known each other, in the months he had courted her with promises he never intended to keep. Across the room, a younger man watched the entire scene unfold with sharp attention. Thomas Rayburn had arrived only an hour earlier, invited as a favor to his uncle, and he found himself unexpectedly transfixed by the tension rippling through the crowd. He turned to the woman beside him, an older widow named Mrs. Agatha Linfield, who seemed to know every scandal London had produced in the last decade. "Who is she?" Thomas asked, "that a duke would defend her so openly before half the peerage?" Agatha's eyes glittered with the particular pleasure of a woman about to deliver excellent gossip. "Beatrice Sherwin, though I suppose we ought to call her Her Grace now. Her father kept a modest shop near Leeds, dealt in fine cloth, nothing grand. She came to London 2 years ago to stay with a cousin and caught the eye of half the eligible men in the city, Frederick Ashby among them. He courted her for the better part of a year, made all manner of promises, and then vanished the moment a wealthier match presented itself. Broke the poor girl thoroughly, from what I heard. And the Duke! No one quite knows how they met. Merrowfield keeps his affairs private, always has. But they married this spring, quietly, without the usual fanfare one expects from a man of his rank. Some say he did it to spite the families who once looked down on her. Others say he simply wanted her." Agatha's fan snapped shut. "Either way, Mr. Ashby has chosen a spectacularly poor evening to remind everyone of his past cruelty." Thomas said nothing, but his gaze drifted back toward the Duke and Duchess, who now stood near the terrace doors, half hidden by the drape of heavy curtains. He noted, with the careful attention of a man accustomed to reading rooms for his own purposes, that the Duke's hand had not left the small of her back since the confrontation began. It was not merely possession. It was protection, the kind a man offers when he understands exactly what has been taken from someone and intends never to let it happen again. Beatrice excused herself a few minutes later, moving toward the terrace alone, and the Duke let her go with only a brief, watchful glance. Frederick, emboldened by wine and wounded pride, saw his opportunity and followed. The night air outside was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of late roses from the gardens below. Beatrice stood at the stone balustrade, her back to the doors, her shoulders set in the particular stillness of a woman holding herself together through sheer will. "Beatrice!" She did not turn. "You should not be out here, Mr. Ashby. My husband does not care for lingering conversations between myself and men who have wronged me. I never meant to humiliate you in there. I spoke without thinking, as I always did with you, apparently." He stepped closer, close enough that she finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. "I did not know you had married. I did not know you had become this. Her voice was quiet, controlled, though something dangerous moved beneath it. "You mean I did not know you had become someone worth respecting. 3 years ago you told my father I was beneath your family's notice. You said it to his face in his own shop, in front of customers who repeated it across half of Leeds within the week. Do you remember that, Frederick? Or was it simply another evening's amusement for you, forgotten by morning?" Frederick's jaw tightened. "I was young, foolish. My family expected. Your family expected you to marry money, and I had none. I understand perfectly well. I understood it then too, though it did not make the humiliation any easier to bear." She drew a slow breath, steadying herself. "I built a life after you left. A difficult one, certainly, but mine. And now I have built another. One you cannot touch. One you cannot mock away with clever words in front of an audience." "Does he know?" Frederick asked suddenly. "Your husband. Does he know everything about your past? Or only the parts you have chosen to share?" Something flickered across her face, gone almost before he could name it. Fear, perhaps, or something closer to old grief. "That is no concern of yours, isn't it? A man like Merrowfield does not marry a shopkeeper's daughter without reason. Beatrice, what did you tell him to secure such a match? Or what did you withhold?" The terrace door opened before she could answer, and the Duke stepped out into the moonlight, his expression carved from something far colder than the night air around them. Frederick felt his stomach drop as those pale eyes settled on him with the calm, deliberate focus of a man deciding precisely how much damage he intended to do. "Mr. Ashby," the Duke said softly, "I believe I told you the night had grown tiresome. I did not expect to find you had followed my wife regardless." Frederick opened his mouth, though no defense came to him fast enough. Behind the Duke, through the terrace doors, he could see the ballroom still watching, still whispering, waiting to see what happened next between the ruined suitor and the man who now called Beatrice his own. The Duke did not raise his voice, but the air on the terrace seemed to grow colder all the same. Frederick took an involuntary step backward, his heel catching against the stone balustrade, and for a moment he thought he might tumble straight over the edge and into the gardens below. The Duke's gaze did not waver from his face. "You will return to the ballroom, collect whatever remains of your dignity, and leave this house before the hour is out," the Duke said. "If I find you have spoken my wife's name again tonight, or any night hereafter, you will discover precisely why men in this city do not cross me twice." "Your Grace, I meant no. I did not ask what you meant. I told you what you will do." Frederick looked once more at Beatrice, who had turned her face toward the gardens, her jaw set, refusing to give him the satisfaction of watching her waver. He opened his mouth as though to argue further, thought better of it, and retreated through the terrace doors with as much composure as he could gather, which was very little. The whispers that followed him back into the ballroom were sharper now, hungrier, the kind that would carry his humiliation across every drawing room in London before the week was through. The Duke waited until the doors had closed fully before he turned to Beatrice. His expression softened, though only slightly, the way stone might soften under long exposure to warm rain. "You are shaking," he said. "I am not. Beatrice." She let out a breath she had been holding since the moment Frederick first spoke her name across the ballroom floor. "I did not expect to see him again. I had convinced myself I never would. London is large enough that a person might vanish into it entirely, and I had hoped he had done exactly that." "He asked what you told me of your past." The Duke's voice was careful now, testing ground he had clearly walked before. "You never answered him, because it was not his to know." She met his eyes finally, and something passed between them that felt older than the few months of their marriage. Something built from long evenings of careful honesty neither had expected to find in a match arranged for far colder reasons. "You know everything, Alistair, every part of it. That is more than he ever earned." The Duke, whose given names so few were permitted to use, allowed himself something close to a smile. "Then let him wonder. It will trouble him considerably more than any answer you might give." They did not return to the ballroom immediately. Instead they walked the length of the terrace, past the roses gone silver in the moonlight, and Beatrice found her hands steadying by degrees, the tightness in her chest easing under the quiet company of a man who had never once, in all their months together, made her feel as small as Frederick Ashby had managed in a single sentence. Inside, the gossip spread with the particular speed reserved for scandals involving both money and pride. Mrs. Agatha Linfield had already told the story to no fewer than 6 separate groups by the time the orchestra resumed playing, embellishing details with each retelling until Frederick's humiliation had grown considerably larger than the truth, though the truth alone would have sufficed. Thomas Rayburn found himself unable to stop thinking of the Duchess's face in the moment before her husband arrived. The flicker of old pain quickly smoothed away beneath practiced composure. He recognized something in it, some private grief carried carefully so as not to disturb those around her, and it stirred in him a curiosity he could not fully explain even to himself. "You are staring at the terrace doors," Agatha observed, following his gaze with evident amusement. "Careful, young man. Merrifield does not care for admirers of his wife, however innocent the intention." "I was not admiring. I was considering." "Considering what, precisely?" Thomas hesitated. "Whether a woman who has survived what she survived deserves to have it dragged into a ballroom for entertainment. It seems like a cruel sort of sport." Agatha's expression shifted, the teasing edge softening into something more thoughtful. "You are kinder than most men your age, Mr. Rayburn. Do try not to let London beat that out of you. It has a way of doing that to good men." Across the room, near the refreshment table, a woman in a gown of deep embroidered silk watched the unfolding scandal with far less amusement than her neighbors. Lady Josephine Wexley had married into wealth some years prior, though her family's fortune had come from trade rather than title, a fact that had never fully been forgiven by the peerage, no matter how many charitable committees she chaired or how carefully she arranged her drawing room. She recognized something of herself in the whispered story of Beatrice Sherwin, a woman risen from modest beginnings into a world that would never quite stop reminding her of where she began. She made her way toward the terrace doors as the Duke and Duchess returned inside, catching Beatrice's eye with a small, knowing nod, the kind exchanged between women who understood precisely what it cost to hold one's head high in a room built to make them feel small. "Your Grace," Josephine said, dropping a brief curtsy as Beatrice approached. "I wonder if I might have a private word, when convenience allows." Beatrice studied her for a moment, uncertain of the intention behind the request, though something in Josephine's steady gaze suggested solidarity rather than further scrutiny. "Of course, Lady Wexley. Perhaps tomorrow, if you would call at Merrifield House." "I would be glad to." The Duke watched the brief exchange with quiet interest but said nothing, guiding Beatrice instead toward a quieter corner of the ballroom where the Marquis of Holbrook, an old friend of his late father, waited to offer congratulations on the marriage and inquire, with the bluntness of a man well past caring for delicate phrasing, whether the rumors of the evening held any truth. "Every word," the Duke said simply, "though I suspect the truth will grow stranger still before London tires of the story." He was not wrong. By the following morning, the tale had reached far beyond the walls of the ballroom, carried by servants and guests alike into breakfast rooms across the city, where it was dissected over tea and toast with the particular relish reserved for the misfortunes of the fashionable. Frederick Ashby did not sleep that night. He sat in his study long after the household had gone quiet, a glass of brandy untouched at his elbow, turning over the evening's events with the sick, sinking dread of a man who understood he had made an enemy of someone with the power to unmake him entirely. His family's finances, he knew better than anyone, could not withstand the scrutiny that came with a duke's displeasure. The debts his father had left behind, carefully hidden from society's notice through years of careful appearances, would not survive a man like Merrifield deciding to look too closely. A knock came at his study door near midnight, and his valet entered with a letter that had arrived by private courier, bearing no seal Frederick recognized. He opened it with unsteady hands, and as he read, the color drained slowly from his face for the second time that evening. The letter was brief and signed and precise. It informed him that certain debts held against the Ashby estate had recently changed hands, purchased in full by an interested party who wished, for the present, to remain anonymous. It suggested, in language too polite to be anything but threatening, that Frederick might soon find himself called upon to discuss repayment terms considerably less favorable than those he currently enjoyed. Frederick read the letter 3 times before setting it down, his mind racing through every possibility of who might hold such leverage over him and why they had chosen this particular night to reveal it. Merrifield's reach was known to extend into every corner of London's financial world, but the Duke had left the ballroom at his side, had spent the whole of the evening in plain view. It seemed unlikely, though not impossible, that he could have arranged such a maneuver so swiftly, which left the far more unsettling question of who else in London might wish to see Frederick Ashby ruined, and why they had chosen this precise moment to strike. Morning came to Marrowfield House with pale gold light spilling across the breakfast room, and Beatrice sat with a cup of tea cooling untouched before her, her mind still tangled in the previous night's events. Alistair watched her from across the table, a folded newspaper set aside, his expression carrying the particular patience of a man who had learned not to press his wife toward conversation she was not yet ready to give. "You did not sleep," he said finally. "Neither did you. I had matters to attend to." He turned his cup slowly on its saucer. "Frederick Ashby's family carries considerable debt, more than society realizes. I gave instructions last night that it be purchased." Beatrice looked up sharply. "Alistair, I did not do it for vengeance alone, though I will not pretend the thought held no appeal." His voice remained even, though something harder moved beneath it. "A man who speaks to you as he did in a room full of witnesses is a man who requires a lesson in consequence. I intend for him to learn it thoroughly. And if it ruins his family entirely, his mother, his sisters, people who had no part in what he did to me." The Duke considered this a moment longer than she expected. "I have given instruction that the family's household expenses remain untouched. It is Frederick alone who will feel the weight of what he owes. I am not without mercy, Beatrice, only without patience for men who mistake cruelty for wit." She said nothing further on the matter, though the tightness in her chest eased somewhat at the knowledge that his anger, however formidable, had boundaries she could trust. Lady Josephine Wexley arrived at Marrowfield House shortly after noon, shown into the drawing-room by a footman who announced her with the particular formality reserved for guests the household did not yet know well. Beatrice rose to greet her, curious despite herself about the nature of the visit. "Your Grace, thank you for receiving me so promptly." Josephine settled into the offered chair, folding her gloved hands with evident care. "I will not waste your time with idle pleasantries. I understand some of what you endured last evening, and I thought you might benefit from knowing you are not entirely without allies in this city." "You are kind enough to say so." "Not kind. Practical." Josephine's mouth curved into something wry. "My own beginnings were considerably less grand than my current situation would suggest. Trade, if you can imagine the horror of it, whispered about still in certain drawing rooms despite the decades since my marriage. I know precisely how it feels to have one's origins used as a weapon by those who consider themselves superior for no reason beyond an accident of birth." Beatrice found herself relaxing slightly, grateful for company that required no careful performance. "Frederick believed my past made me unworthy of him then. I imagine he believes something rather different now that circumstance has reversed itself. Men like Frederick Ashby rarely believe anything beyond what serves them in the moment." Josephine's expression sharpened. "Though I did not come only to offer sympathy. I have heard whispers this morning, Your Grace, concerning the debts purchased against his family. Whispers suggest the purchase was not made by your husband alone, but that another party moved swiftly to secure a portion of the same debt before Marrowfield's agents could complete the transaction." Beatrice felt a small chill move through her. "Another party. Do you know who?" "Only a name, and an unreliable one at that. Lord Simon Redgrave. Do you know it?" The name meant nothing to Beatrice, though something in Josephine's careful tone suggested it ought to mean something more. "He arrived in London perhaps 2 years past," Josephine continued. "From what background no one seems entirely certain, though his wealth is considerable and his ambitions, from what little I have observed, considerably more so. He has spent the better part of a year attempting to secure a foothold among the peerage through marriage, investment, and, I suspect, less honorable means where those failed to suffice. If he now holds a portion of Frederick Ashby's debt, it suggests an interest in the man's ruin that has nothing to do with your evening's humiliation and everything to do with some private grievance of his own. Beatrice absorbed this slowly. Why would he move so quickly? Alistair only gave the order last night. Precisely the question that troubles me. Josephine leaned forward slightly. It suggests either extraordinary luck, or that Lord Redgrave was already watching Frederick Ashby's finances before last evening's scandal ever occurred, which raises the rather uncomfortable possibility that whatever quarrel exists between them predates you entirely, Your Grace, and that last night's events merely gave him convenient cover to act. When Alistair returned from his afternoon business at the bank, Beatrice relayed the conversation with careful precision, watching his expression shift from mild interest into something considerably more focused. Redgrave, he repeated. I know the name, though only in passing. He has made overtures toward several banking houses this past year, always with more ambition than capital to support it. I did not realize his interests extended toward Ashby's family specifically. Josephine believes the quarrel predates last night. Then I intend to learn what it concerns. Alistair's jaw set in the particular way she had come to recognize as the outward sign of a decision already made. A man moving that quickly against a rival's finances is a man with resources I did not account for, and resources I do not understand are resources that trouble me considerably. That evening, as the household settled into silence, Beatrice found herself walking the long gallery of Marrowfield House, past portraits of Alistair's ancestors, stern-faced men and women whose painted eyes seemed to follow her progress with quiet judgment. She paused before a portrait near the gallery's end, a woman with dark hair and a gentle expression entirely unlike the severity of those around her. "My mother," Alistair said from behind her, his footsteps having gone unnoticed on the thick carpet. "She died when I was young. My father never quite recovered from it, and I fear the household suffered considerably under his grief for years afterward. I did not know. There is a great deal you do not know of me still, as I imagine there remains a great deal I do not know of you." He came to stand beside her, studying his mother's portrait with an expression she could not fully read. "I did not marry you merely to spite society for its treatment of you, Beatrice, though I will admit the thought held some appeal in the beginning. I married you because you reminded me that kindness and strength were not opposing qualities, however much this city insists otherwise." Beatrice turned to study him, struck as she often was by how little the ballroom's version of her husband, the ruthless Duke whispered about in every drawing room, resembled the man who stood beside her now. Frederick used to say I was too soft to survive in society, that I felt things too deeply to endure its cruelties. Frederick mistook softness for weakness. They are not the same thing. Alistair's hand found hers, his grip steady. "I have watched you endure a great deal these past months without once losing the part of yourself that makes you who you are. That is not weakness, Beatrice. That is the rarest kind of strength I have ever encountered." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps in the corridor, and a moment later a footman appeared at the gallery's entrance, breathless and visibly uneasy. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. A messenger has arrived from Lord Redgrave's household, insisting the matter cannot wait until morning." Alistair's expression hardened instantly, the warmth of moments before being replaced by the cold, calculating focus Beatrice had witnessed only once before, on the terrace the previous night. "Send him in." The messenger who entered moments later was young, clearly nervous, clutching a sealed letter with white-knuckled hands. He offered it to the Duke with a bow that trembled slightly at its edges. Lord Redgrave requests your presence at his residence tomorrow evening, Your Grace. He wishes to discuss a matter of mutual interest concerning the Ashby estate, and suggests you bring the Duchess, as the matter concerns her rather directly. Beatrice felt the floor shift beneath her. Concerns me? I have never met the man. The messenger's uneasy glance flickered toward her before returning to the Duke. Lord Redgrave asked me to convey a further message, Your Grace, should you require persuasion to attend. He said to tell you that he knew the Duchess's family in Leeds, before her arrival in London, and that certain truths from that time remain unspoken which he believes both of you would benefit from hearing before they reach less careful ears. The gallery fell silent, the portraits of long-dead Marrowfields watching from their gilded frames as Beatrice felt every certainty she had built over the past year begin, quietly and without warning, to crack beneath her feet. Beatrice did not sleep again that night. She lay awake long after the candles had burned low, turning over the messenger's words until they lost all shape and became simply a weight pressing against her chest. Certain truths from that time remain unspoken. She searched her memory for anything from her years in Leeds that might warrant such a threat. Any secret buried deeply enough that even she had nearly forgotten it existed. But nothing surfaced beyond the ordinary griefs of a modest life. Her father's failing shop, her mother's early death, the quiet desperation of watching a family slowly lose its footing in a world that offered no mercy to those without means. Alistair rose before dawn and spent the early hours in his study, and when Beatrice found him there near mid-morning, papers covered the desk before him. Correspondence and ledgers spread in careful order as though he might uncover Redgrave's intentions through sheer force of scrutiny. "You have not slept either," she said. "I do not require much." He did not look up immediately, his attention fixed on a letter he had clearly read several times already. "I have written to an old associate in Leeds, a man who once handled certain investments on my family's behalf in the northern counties. If Redgrave has some history with your family, there may be a record of it somewhere, some thread I can follow before this evening's meeting. And if there is nothing to find, if whatever he intends to reveal is simply invented, meant to unsettle us both." Alistair finally looked up, and something in his expression softened the hard focus of moments before. "Then we will know it for the lie it is, and Redgrave will have gained nothing beyond a wasted evening and my considerable displeasure." She wanted to believe the confidence in his voice, but a small, persistent unease remained lodged beneath her ribs, the particular dread of a person who suspects, without quite knowing why, that some old wound is about to be reopened. The carriage arrived at Redgrave's residence as the last light faded from the sky, the house itself grander than Beatrice had expected, its facade lit by rows of windows blazing with candlelight against the deepening dusk. A footman in unfamiliar livery led them through a hall decorated with a wealth that felt somehow performative, every surface gilded, every painting chosen more for its cost than its beauty. Lord Simon Redgrave received them in a study lined with books that looked untouched, seated behind a desk of dark polished wood, his expression carrying the particular satisfaction of a man who believed he held every advantage in the room. He was younger than Beatrice had imagined, perhaps not much older than Alistair himself, with sharp features and eyes that moved over both of them with unhurried assessment. "Your Grace, Duchess, I am gratified you accepted my invitation." He gestured toward two chairs positioned before his desk, though neither Beatrice nor Alistair moved to sit. "I understand the notice was somewhat abrupt. You suggested a matter concerning my wife's family," Alistair said. "I would prefer you address it directly rather than waste the evening on pleasantries." Redgrave's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. He opened a drawer and withdrew a slim folder, setting it on the desk without yet offering it forward. "My father was a merchant in Leeds some years past, Your Grace, before circumstances forced our family south. He held business dealings with a man named Thomas Sherwin, a cloth merchant of modest means, who I believe you may recognize as the Duchess's father. Beatrice felt her pulse quicken. My father dealt with many merchants in Leeds. I do not recall the name Redgrave among them. Understandable, given how young you were at the time, and how carefully certain matters were kept from you. He opened the folder finally, sliding a single document across the desk surface. My father extended considerable credit to your father in his final years. Credit that was never repaid before his death left the debt unresolved. I have spent some years attempting to recover what is rightfully owed to my family, Duchess, and I confess I was rather surprised to discover the debtor's daughter had risen to such considerable heights in the interim. Alistair's expression remained carefully neutral, though Beatrice could sense the tension coiled beneath his stillness. You purchased Frederick Ashby's debts to draw our attention. This meeting was never about Ashby at all. Ashby was merely convenient. Redgrave's gaze shifted to Beatrice, something almost pitying in it now. I confess I did not expect to find the Duchess herself present at his humiliation. Fortune favored my timing more than I anticipated. Beatrice looked at the document before her, her father's signature at the bottom, faded but unmistakably his. A memory surfaced, distant and half-formed, of hushed conversations behind closed doors, her father's face drawn with worry in those final months before his death. Though she had been too young then, too consumed with her own grief, to understand the full weight of what troubled him. "What is it you want?" she asked quietly. "Simply what is owed." Redgrave folded his hands atop the desk. "The sum, with the years of accumulated interest, is not insignificant. I imagine a duke's resources could satisfy it easily enough, though I confess I am equally curious what the Duchess's response might be, given how thoroughly she seems to have distanced herself from her origins since arriving in London." "You mistake distance for shame," Beatrice said, and something in her voice made Redgrave's careful composure flicker, however briefly. "I have never denied where I came from. I have simply chosen not to let it define what I might yet become." Alistair moved then, placing a hand lightly against the small of her back, the same quiet gesture of protection he had offered on the terrace 2 nights before. "I will have my solicitor review this document tomorrow morning, Lord Redgrave. If the debt is legitimate, it will be settled promptly and without further theatrics. If, as I suspect, you have inflated the sum considerably beyond what my wife's father actually owed, you will find I am considerably less patient with those who attempt to extract money from my family through manufactured pressure." Redgrave's expression tightened, the confident satisfaction of moments before giving way to something more guarded. "You believe I have fabricated the debt entirely. I believe men rarely go to such elaborate lengths for a sum they could have simply requested through ordinary channels." Alistair's voice remained level, though the warning beneath it was unmistakable. "Good evening, Lord Redgrave. I trust we will not require a second meeting on this matter." They left the house in silence, the carriage rattling over cobblestones as London's evening settled fully into darkness around them. Beatrice stared out the window, her mind circling back again and again to her father's signature on that document, to the memory of his worried face in those final months, to a childhood she had thought she understood completely until this evening suggested otherwise. "You believe him," she said finally, "about the debt. I believe your father likely owed something, yes. Merchants of modest means often required credit to survive difficult seasons, and Leeds saw more than its share of difficult seasons in those years." Alistair's hand found hers in the darkness of the carriage. "What I do not believe is that the sum Redgrave named bears any honest relation to what was actually owed, nor do I believe his interest in this matter is purely financial. A man does not orchestrate an elaborate confrontation before a duke and duchess simply to collect a debt he might have pursued through the courts years ago. Then what does he want? Alistair was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the passing streets beyond the window. I do not yet know, but I intend to find out before he decides to act again. And next time, Beatrice, I suspect he will not give us the courtesy of a warning. The solicitor arrived at Marrowfield House 2 days later. A thin, precise man named Mr. Aubrey Finch, who had served the family for over 20 years and possessed the particular talent of finding truth buried beneath layers of deliberate obscurity. He spent the better part of a day reviewing the document Redgrave had provided, cross-referencing it against records obtained from Leeds through Alistair's correspondence. And when he finally presented his findings in the study that evening, his expression carried the quiet satisfaction of a man who had confirmed exactly what he suspected. The debt is genuine, Your Grace, though considerably smaller than what Lord Redgrave claimed. Thomas Sherwin borrowed against a poor season some 11 years past, a sum easily settled within a year or two under ordinary circumstances. The interest Redgrave has calculated bears no relation to any lawful rate, and the original creditor was not his father at all, but a banking house that dissolved shortly after Sherwin's death, its remaining assets sold at considerable loss. Then how did Redgrave acquire it? Alistair asked. That is the more troubling question, Your Grace. The debt should have been settled in full when the bank dissolved, as was standard practice at the time. I suspect Lord Redgrave purchased the record itself, incomplete as it was, from whatever clerk handled the dissolution, and has since represented it as an ongoing obligation his own family personally extended. It is, in effect, a fabrication built atop a fragment of truth. Beatrice, who had remained quiet through most of the exchange, finally spoke. Why would he go to such trouble over a debt worth so little? Finch hesitated, glancing toward Alistair before continuing. I made further inquiries into Lord Redgrave's history, Your Grace, given the peculiar nature of his interest in this matter. He arrived in London 2 years past under circumstances that remain somewhat obscured, though I did uncover one detail that may prove relevant. His mother, before her marriage, was employed for a time as a seamstress in a shop in Leeds. The same shop, in fact, once employed a young woman named Sarah Hollis, who later became housekeeper to the Sherwin family. Beatrice felt something cold settle low in her stomach. I remember Sarah. She left our household when I was perhaps 12 years old, not long before my mother's death. According to the records I obtained, she left rather suddenly, Duchess, following an incident that was never fully explained in any surviving correspondence. I suspect, though I cannot yet prove it, that whatever occurred between your family and Sarah Hollis lies at the heart of Lord Redgrave's true grievance, and that the debt was never more than a convenient excuse to gain access to you both. Alistair dismissed Finch with instructions to continue his inquiries, and once the study had emptied, he turned to Beatrice with careful patience. Do you remember anything more about this incident? Anything at all that might explain why a housekeeper's departure 11 years past should matter enough to bring a man across the country to pursue it? Beatrice searched her memory, pressing past the comfortable fog that had settled over those years, and slowly, reluctantly, a fragment surfaced. My mother argued with my father the week before Sarah left. I remember only pieces of it, voices raised behind a closed door, my mother saying something about a promise that could not be kept, my father insisting it was the only choice available to them. I was young. I did not understand it then, and I confess I have not thought of it since. A promise concerning what? I do not know. I never asked, and by the time I was old enough to wonder, both my parents were gone, and there was no one left to answer the question. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor to Marrowfield House, a woman of perhaps 50 years, her clothing modest but well kept, her face carrying the particular weariness of someone who had traveled a considerable distance on uncertain business. She gave her name to the footman as Sarah Hollis, and requested, with evident nervousness, a private audience with the Duchess. Beatrice received her in the small parlor near the back of the house, her heart racing with an anticipation she could not fully explain. Sarah's face, once she entered, stirred a memory long buried. A gentle woman who had cared for Beatrice through the worst of her childhood illnesses, who had sung softly in the kitchen while kneading bread, who had vanished from her life without explanation and never been spoken of again. "Your Grace," Sarah said, dropping into an unsteady curtsy. "Forgive my intrusion. I read of the events at the ball, of Mr. Ashby's cruelty and your husband's response, and I felt it was time I finally told you what I should have told you many years ago. Please sit." Beatrice gestured toward the chair opposite her own, studying the older woman's careful, anxious expression. "I remember you left our household rather suddenly. I never understood why." Sarah's hands twisted together in her lap. "Your father dismissed me, Your Grace, though the fault was never truly mine. I had grown close to a young man in those years, a clerk employed at the bank your father dealt with. We intended to marry, though his family disapproved considerably, believing me beneath their station despite my honest work. When his family discovered our engagement, they pressured your father to dismiss me, threatening to withdraw certain favorable terms on his outstanding credit if he did not comply. Your father had little choice. The shop could not have survived the loss of that arrangement." Beatrice absorbed this slowly. "The young man, was his name Redgrave?" Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "You know of it already?" "Only a fragment. Please, continue." "His name was indeed Redgrave, Your Grace. Edmund Redgrave, though he went by a different surname in those years, his family having only recently acquired their fortune through trade and eager to distance themselves from anything that hinted at common origins. We were forbidden from marrying, and I was dismissed within the week, sent away with barely enough coin to secure passage to my sister's household in Bristol. I never saw him again, though I heard some years later he had married elsewhere, a match arranged for advantage rather than affection, and that a son was born of it not long after." The pieces settled into place with a clarity that left Beatrice momentarily breathless. "Lord Redgrave believes my family destroyed his mother's happiness, that my father's dismissal of you, forced though it was, cost his parents any chance at the life they might have built together. I cannot say what the young lord believes, Your Grace, only what actually occurred. Your father was not a cruel man. He was simply a man without power, forced into a decision that cost me dearly and, it seems, cost the Redgrave family something they have carried bitterly ever since." Beatrice sat with the revelation for a long moment, the anger she might have expected to feel replaced instead by something closer to sorrow, for Sarah, for her own father caught between impossible choices, and for a man she had never met who had apparently spent years nursing a grievance built on his parents' thwarted love rather than any true wrong done by her family. When Alistair returned that afternoon and heard the full account, his expression settled into the same careful stillness she had come to recognize as thoughtful calculation rather than anger. "Redgrave has built his campaign against you on his mother's heartbreak," he said finally, "believing your father responsible for a decision that was, in truth, forced upon him by Redgrave's own family. It is a bitter sort of irony that his grievance against you should rest on a wrong committed by his own relations rather than yours. What do we do now? We give him the truth, plainly and without ceremony, and see whether he is a man capable of hearing it." Alistair's jaw set with quiet determination. "I will arrange a second meeting, though this time I intend to bring Mrs. Hollis along, and I intend for him to hear her account directly rather than through the comfortable distance of second-hand rumor." Beatrice nodded, though a small unease lingered beneath her resolve. The sense that a man who had traveled so far and schemed so carefully might not welcome a truth that dismantled the grievance he had built his ambitions upon, however false its foundation had proven to be. The second meeting was arranged for the following evening, though this time Alistair chose neutral ground, a private room at his solicitor's offices rather than Redgrave's own residence. A small deliberate signal that the balance of power in this exchange had shifted considerably since their first encounter. Sarah Hollis arrived early, seated quietly near the window, her hands folded in her lap, her expression carrying the particular calm of a woman who had waited 11 years to finally speak a truth she had never been permitted to voice. Lord Redgrave entered precisely on time, his confident bearing from their first meeting somewhat diminished, though he covered it well beneath a veneer of composed indifference. He stopped short the moment he saw Sarah, and for the briefest instant, something raw and unguarded crossed his features before he mastered it once more. "You did not mention you intended to bring guests," he said to Alistair, though his eyes remained fixed on the woman by the window. "I believed you would want to hear this account directly rather than through further speculation." Alistair gestured toward the empty chair across from Sarah. "Sit, Lord Redgrave. I think you already know who this is." Redgrave did not sit immediately. He studied Sarah's face with the careful, searching attention of a man looking for some trace of a story he had only ever heard secondhand, filtered through a mother's bitterness and years of accumulated grievance. "My mother spoke of you often in her final years. She never said your name, only that a man in Leeds had cost her the life she wanted. Your grandfather, Lord Redgrave, not Mr. Sherwin." Sarah's voice remained steady, though Beatrice could see the effort it cost her. "It was your father's family who threatened to withdraw credit from the Sherwin shop unless I was dismissed. Thomas Sherwin had no power to refuse them. He was a man of modest means with a wife and young daughter to protect, and your family held his livelihood in their hands. He did what any father in his position might have done, though I know it brought him little peace afterward." Redgrave lowered himself slowly into the chair, his earlier composure entirely abandoned now. "My mother told me the merchant dismissed you out of simple prejudice, that he considered our family beneath his notice despite our wealth, and used the excuse of some minor debt to justify sending you away rather than see his household associated with a seamstress's daughter. Your mother believed what she needed to believe, I imagine, to survive the loss of what she wanted." Sarah's expression softened with something that looked almost like sympathy. "I do not fault her for it. Grief reshapes memory in ways we cannot always control. But the truth, Lord Redgrave, is that your own grandfather engineered the very outcome your mother spent her life mourning, and Thomas Sherwin was merely the instrument through which that cruelty was carried out." The room fell quiet for a long moment, Redgrave's gaze fixed on some point beyond the window, his jaw working as though testing the weight of a story that upended everything he had believed for years. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier sharpness entirely. "I have spent 2 years building a fortune with the express purpose of one day confronting the family I believed responsible for my mother's unhappiness. I purchased Ashby's debt believing it would draw the Duchess's attention, believing I might finally extract some measure of justice for what was taken from my mother." He looked toward Beatrice now, something like shame flickering across his features. "I see now I built an entire campaign upon a story that was never true." "You built it upon a story your mother believed true," Beatrice said gently. "That is not the same as deliberate deceit. Grief makes liars of even the most honest among us, Lord Redgrave, when the alternative is admitting the person we loved was failed by our own family rather than a stranger's cruelty." Alistair, who had remained largely silent through the exchange, finally spoke. "I do not intend to pursue further consequences for what you have done, Lord Redgrave," provided you release whatever remains of the fabricated claim against my wife's family and cease your pursuit of Ashby's debt for purposes beyond honest collection. You have caused considerable trouble through this affair, but I understand now it grew from genuine grief rather than simple malice, and I am not in the habit of punishing men for grief, however poorly it has led them to act. Redgrave nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I am grateful for the mercy, Your Grace, more than I perhaps deserve. I will release the claim immediately, and I believe I owe Mrs. Hollis an apology considerably overdue. Sarah offered him a small, tired smile. It was never your debt to settle, Lord Redgrave, only your mother's grief to carry, and I am sorry you carried it for so long without knowing its true shape. The weeks that followed brought a quiet settling to Marrowfield House, the scandal of the ballroom gradually fading beneath newer gossip as London's attention, fickle as always, moved on to fresher entertainments. Frederick Ashby, humbled considerably by the affair, retreated from society for a time, his family's finances restored once Alistair released the debt he had purchased, though the damage to Frederick's reputation lingered considerably longer than any financial burden might have. Lady Josephine Wexley became a frequent visitor to Marrowfield House in the months that followed, her friendship with Beatrice deepening into something genuine and lasting, built on the shared understanding of women who had climbed from modest beginnings into a world that never fully forgot where they started. Thomas Rayburn, who had watched the entire affair unfold with such careful attention on that first evening, found himself drawn increasingly into Alistair's circle, his quiet intelligence earning him a position managing certain of the Duke's northern investments, a role that suited his thoughtful nature considerably better than the idle pursuits expected of most young gentlemen. Sarah Hollis remained in London at Beatrice's insistence, given a comfortable position within the Marrowfield household that finally offered her the security so cruelly denied her 11 years before. She and Beatrice spent long afternoons together in the weeks that followed, piecing together the fragments of a childhood Beatrice had never fully understood, and in doing so, Beatrice found a measure of peace with a father she had spent years believing had simply failed to protect her family from hardship, when in truth he had protected them from something considerably worse through sacrifices she had never known to appreciate. On a quiet evening in late autumn, Beatrice stood once more in the long gallery of Marrowfield House, before the portrait of Alistair's mother, the candlelight casting soft shadows across the painted face that had watched over the household for so many years. Alistair found her there, as he often did, and came to stand beside her in comfortable silence before finally speaking. "You seem at peace tonight." "I am, I think, for the first time in a very long while." Beatrice turned to study him, struck again by how thoroughly her understanding of him had changed since that first terrible night at the ball. "I came to London believing I had left everything behind me in Leeds, only to discover the past follows regardless of how far we travel from it. I am grateful, at least, that what followed me here was truth rather than simple cruelty." "Truth is rarely simple," Alistair said. "But it is, I have found, considerably easier to live with than the alternative." He took her hand, his grip warm and steady in the candlelit quiet. "Whatever comes next, Beatrice, whatever ghosts still wait to surface from either of our pasts, I intend to face them beside you rather than in place of you. That is, I think, the only promise worth making." Outside, the last light of evening faded slowly over London, the city settling into the particular hush of autumn nights, indifferent as always to the private dramas unfolding behind its countless lit windows. But within the walls of Marrowfield House, something had finally settled into place, a marriage born of unlikely circumstance now anchored in a trust neither had expected to find, strong enough to weather whatever the city still had waiting for them. "What did you think of Beatrice and Alistair's story? Did you expect Redgrave's true motive? Or did the twist catch you off guard? Do you think Frederick Ashby deserved the mercy he was shown? Or should the consequences have gone further?" Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from, and share what you'd like to see in the next story. I read every comment and I'll be replying to as many of you as I can. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe so you never miss what comes next.